Hi, Aunt Mary and Uncle Bernard. It's a pleasure to talk with you guys. Let's start off with you, Uncle Bernard. Where were you born and raised?
Right in the south end.
What street?
Tremont Street, 625 Tremont Street. Right around the corner.
Very nice. We're on West Canton Street right now. Where were you born and raised?
I was born on number 9 Dartmouth Street. That's the first house that my parents bought.
Very nice. Of all your years living here in the South End, what cultural changes have you observed within the time period of the 20th century to now?
Do you want to start?
Myriad changes. It was basically a single family owned home that had rooms for rent. They rented out rooms in that individual home. In other words, a house like this would have 3 or 4 roomers living in the house. You'd rent out 3 or 4, either a side room or a square room. And that's how they made their way in order to stay in the city.
They're boarding houses.
Not boarding house. They didn't provide any meals, just rooms. A bed and bed, just a bed and a dresser and a bathroom. And they generally only had 1 bathroom for 5 or 6 rooms. And that was a challenge on Saturday nights when people wanted to take a bath because we didn't have showers at that time.
Have you noticed anything?
Are you talking about changes, honey? Or
Yeah,
starting
cultural
when we
changes
grew up?
or
Yeah,
just,
well, when we grew
just
up,
free talk.
yeah, well, when we grew up, number 9 Dartmouth Street, that was the first house that my parents bought, but they came in with the idea. My father had come back, they had met on the Cape. My father was older than my mother when they met, and they came in with the idea. He had a business up in the western part of the state. He was a printer, and a very finished printer, a very, very talented man. And their idea was to buy houses and to make a business out of real estate. My mother was very, very bright. And so when I first grew up there, of course I don't remember too much, I was very little. And then they moved and they bought West Newton Street, which is only 4 blocks over. And it was mostly middle to upper class working background. There were different sections of the city. There was a Greek section. There was a Lebanese section, which was over on Mass Avenue. There was sort of an Irish section, but that was sort of melded in, sort of.
Yeah.
And the Italian section, because we had friends who were Italian. It was really a wonderful mixture to grow up in. But the changes came later on as we were older. You know, the changes into the 50s, into the 60s, it got pretty turbulent then. But at that beginning, it was pretty stable. It was pretty stable. There were a lot of rooming houses, but there were many single-family homes.
Now, would you elaborate more on what the changes came, as you said, in the 50s and the 60s?
Yeah. When we were in high school, we all generally, most of us went to the neighborhood schools. Not very far.
Well, that was one of the beautiful factors here. Children could walk to school. You didn't have to have a bus. The schools were all in this neighborhood.
Well, and then that all of the controversy
right here
about the
on,
budget.
we had the Rice and Bancroft schools on Appleton Street and on Dartmouth Street, and then we had the Boston English High School. The premier school in Boston was right here on Montgomery Street.
Beautiful, beautiful buildings. As a neighborhood across the country, I think it started to happen at that time. People were rediscovering what the city was, and a lot of times at that time the inner city were sliding. They just didn't, the government, I don't know quite what it was, I'm trying to remember now back, they just didn't seem to care. The picking up of garbage, the keeping things right, everything sort of slid. And people were
That
were
was
getting
when you had lower.
discouraged. Well, then urban renewal came in, but even before then, so that things started to change, and many people thought, well, we're going to move out. The suburbs was the big draw at that time, to move out, to have a little more space. And then urban renewal moved into the area, and that was very turbulent because there was a lot of controversy about that. They were out, as they so-called, at that time we were very angry about it, so-called tearing down slum property within the cities, as they so also said Boston, which was a very bad term, because it wasn't slum, they were beautiful buildings, as they are now. But people weren't maintaining them, a lot of people didn't have the money to maintain them, because a lot of people who owned them moved out, and they fell into more and more.
They were rental properties,
Rental properties, which generally don't work very well in a city. So the changes started to come then, and then urban renewal came in, and without any, we sat at so many meetings at that time, they started to tear down properties without the people in the area having any say at all. There were meetings, and they would listen, but then they just went ahead, they tore down areas over here on Tremont Street, which is Castle Square. But it was a beautiful area, a very beautiful area. But
we lost 4 churches in there.
yeah, it was a beautiful area.
They actually tore down 4 beautiful churches.
But the thing was, I think that people got discouraged and moved out. They moved out, they saw the changes. And then what happened, it started to reverse itself, and people who had wherewithal and money started to rediscover the cities as we see it now, and coming back in. And people are displaced. Gentrification, that they termed it, that was the big word then. And people were displaced. But there were so many pros and cons on that, because
that moves into my next question. I was saying, what do you think the results of do you think the results of gentrification have been positive or negative, or more of the same?
Yeah, it's so controversial. There are 2 very strong sides of it. From what we could, what we saw was that people were paid fair housing at that market value at that time.
They were paid to leave the property. That's
Yeah,
what,
well, but if they wanted to leave, it was fair market value.
That's right, and that was determined by the city assessor.
Yeah, right.
And it didn't actually give you any choice in bargaining with them.
So then you had people coming in who really seemed to appreciate the houses, wanted to redo them. And as you're still seeing now, it's still, that movement is still even stronger than it was then. But there were a lot of, on the controversial side, people felt very bad that people on lower income and such who couldn't afford to do this were pushed out. So it was there were a lot of controversial meetings, and they wanted parcels of land that were kept for moderate to low income housing. And there was a lot of controversy about that, because we felt also, we still do, a lot of this low income housing doesn't work very well. So they took a huge parcel of land over here, which was called Tent City at the time, and Mel King was very involved in that, very, very much so. And he was right, we could understand and see that. And then sort of compensating that, the city granted land to Copley Place, which is a high-end, huge development.
That's that big mall that's on
which knows that. So they were trying to balance it at that time. But it's, I can't say, it's hard. I kind of stand in the middle. I can understand both points. You know, you want the city to flourish and to grow, and yet you have to be so careful how you do this. And when you don't have a voice in it, and so many people felt that they didn't have a voice in it, that was the big problem.
And that's the same type of thing that happened in Castle Square.
Yeah, we really didn't have a choice when they took down that whole neighborhood. But it started in the west end of Boston. They tore out that whole beautiful area of Boston. It was very old, but it was mostly Jewish. and it was a thriving Jewish community.
There were 4 synagogues
Because we had
down
friends,
there.
yeah.
There's only one left, and it's a historic building.
Right.
If it hadn't been declared as historic,
And there were beautiful houses like these, you know, the brick houses. But they were old. But you had developers also, there's always money in the background in politics in this. And this was all whirring in the background. You know, who had the power, who had the money to push this.
they had a market district, remember down in the West End, in Haymarket?
Oh,
All the vendors would line up along the street, and people would be upstairs in the window, and they'd look out and they'd say, "Jay, how are you? We saw you last week. The tomatoes are great this week." And it was
Yeah,
really
it was a
amazing.
great neighborhood. So it really did a lot of damage. It sort of destroyed these really old neighborhoods.
Yeah. Thank you for sitting down with me. Thank you for the time.
Oh,
you
you're
put in.
welcome. Is that it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I
now
hope
let
you
me
I
see.
don't know. I
Just a
hope you
little
don't
closing
love it.
question.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing about the South End?
When I grew up, it was all of the diversity of the children and the neighborhoods. My sisters had great friends in the Lebanese community, and we grew up also with black children, which was great. So we had a very good open feeling about people. That I loved about the city, and I still do. And I think that's sort of changing now a little bit,
And
because more and more people are sort of being pushed out. And neighborhoods change with that. And some people say, well, this is good, they're restoring the houses and it's beautiful, but you lose a flavor a little bit, I think, too.
And there were quite a few elderly people here, and
Yeah, there
it
were a
also
lot of
gave you
elderly.
as a youngster a seeing of how people have,
Yes,
as
how
they
they
age,
Yeah, we
and
had a
how
lot of older.
they needed
Right.
help.
Yeah.
We all found out that people would call to you, would you bring me home a quart of milk,
Yeah,
or would
when
you?
we grew up,
Yeah.
it was that was something.
And
I believe
everybody,
Yeah,
at that time, everybody was involved with
yeah, it was,
other
yeah,
people in the neighborhood. It
Yeah,
was really a,
yeah, everyone sort of knew, it was different, you would know everyone because of the schools, there was no busing at that time. It was more so tight-knit, it really was, the South End was a very unique place.
I'd get in
There were
trouble.
problems.
I'd get in trouble with some kids over on West Newton Street, and my mother would know about it the next morning. And their mother would come over and say to my mother, "Your son was over here the other night, and he was raising hell on the street. Why don't you keep him home?" And she said, it was just, everybody knew everybody in the neighborhood. It was so open.
Yeah, it was, that was great. It's a little, it's changed, but everything changes. I think we have to be sort of open to that flux and change, which can be very difficult.